When Dave Mustaine was fired from Metallica in 1983, it was more than just losing a band. It was like losing his future. He had written riffs, contributed lyrics, and shaped their early sound. Metallica was just getting started, but Mustaine already believed they were on the edge of greatness. Then, one cold morning, everything changed. James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, and Cliff Burton sat him down and told him he was out. No warning, no discussion, just gone. They handed him a one-way bus ticket from New York to Los Angeles. Imagine sitting on that long ride, holding your guitar, your pride shattered, knowing that your band was about to conquer the world without you. For many musicians, that would have been the final chapter. But for Dave Mustaine, it was only the beginning of another story. Years later, David Ellefson, who became Mustaine's right-hand man in Megadeth, would look back at this painful chapter with a different perspective. To Ellefson, this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a turning point. He believed that being fired from Metallica gave Mustaine the fuel to create something even more powerful. Mustaine's rage became his motivation. He swore to form a band that would be heavier, faster, and angrier than Metallica. It was the spark that lit the fire of Megadeth. Ellefson would later say, "This moment was both painful and perfect, because sometimes being thrown down forces you to rise higher." Back in Los Angeles, Mustaine was lost. He had talent, but he also carried anger and disappointment everywhere he went. Music was his only escape, and he poured every ounce of frustration into his guitar. It was in this period of chaos that fate brought him face to face with David Ellefson. Ellefson had just moved from Minnesota, a young bassist hungry for opportunity. He lived in the same apartment complex as Mustaine, and one day their paths crossed. Ellefson recalled hearing Mustaine playing guitar through the walls. The sound was raw, aggressive, and unlike anything he'd ever heard. Curious, he introduced himself, and the two instantly connected. Ellefson didn't just find a bandmate, he found a partner. Together, they began experimenting with new riffs and ideas. Ellefson quickly realized that Mustaine's firing from Metallica had left him with a burning desire to prove himself. Every rehearsal felt like a mission, every song a statement. In later years, Ellefson would say that if Mustaine had stayed in Metallica, Megadeth would never have existed, and that's why he considered the firing a hidden blessing. Without that rejection, Mustaine might not have pushed himself to build something of his own. The two musicians began shaping a new sound, technical, furious, and ambitious. While Metallica chased fame with their thrash anthems, Mustaine and Ellefson were plotting their own war, and Ellefson knew they were onto something powerful. Revenge is a powerful fuel, and for Dave Mustaine, it became his obsession. Every riff he wrote, every lyric he penned carried the sting of rejection. He wasn't just making music, he was building a weapon. David Ellefson, watching from the front lines, understood this better than anyone. Ellefson once said that Mustaine's determination was unmatched. He didn't want to just succeed, Ellefson explained. He wanted to outdo Metallica. That fire gave Megadeth its identity. Songs were faster, more technical, and darker. The music wasn't just entertainment, it was Mustaine's way of saying, "You made a mistake letting me go." Ellefson admired how Mustaine turned pain into power. Many musicians collapse after being rejected, but Mustaine used rejection as energy. It was almost like every show, every album was his chance to prove Metallica wrong. And for Ellefson, this was the exact reason being fired was a blessing. Without that anger, Mustaine might never have gone so far, so fast. The early days weren't easy. Money was short, equipment was borrowed, and success felt far away. But Mustaine's vision kept them moving. He didn't just want a band, he wanted an empire. Ellefson stood beside him, watching a wounded guitarist transform into a general of thrash metal. And soon, the world would hear what revenge sounded like. In 1983, shortly after leaving Metallica, Mustaine officially formed Megadeth. With David Ellefson on bass, they began to piece together a lineup that could match Mustaine's vision. The goal was clear: to create a band heavier, faster, and more dangerous than anything on the scene. Ellefson remembered those early days vividly. The band lived in poverty, scraping by with little food or money, but what they lacked in comfort, they made up for in passion. They rehearsed endlessly, sometimes for 10 hours straight. Every riff was sharpened like a blade. Mustaine's rage was now focused. Instead of drinking away his pain, he poured it into songwriting, and Ellefson stood by him, learning that pain could be transformed into art. Together, they crafted tracks that would later become staples of the thrash movement. For Ellefson, it was clear, this band wouldn't exist if Mustaine had stayed in Metallica. He often said that the firing forced Dave to step into his own destiny. By being rejected, he was forced to create his own kingdom. And that kingdom was Megadeth. When their debut album, Killing Is My Business, and Business Is Good, dropped in 1985, it was raw, fast, and unapologetic. Fans immediately noticed this was not a copy of Metallica. It was its own beast. Ellefson knew then that Mustaine's pain had birthed something extraordinary, and soon, Megadeth would rise as one of the big four of thrash metal. Megadeth's rise wasn't just about playing faster than Metallica, it was about carving out their own unique sound. David Ellefson recalled how Mustaine demanded precision. While Metallica leaned on raw aggression, Mustaine pushed Megadeth toward technical mastery. Complex riffs, intricate solos, and aggressive bass lines became their signature. Ellefson admired this focus. He often said that Mustaine's obsession with being better than Metallica raised everyone's game. The band wasn't allowed to be sloppy. Every note mattered. And while this sometimes made Mustaine difficult to work with, it also made Megadeth unforgettable. Their second album, Peace Sells, But Who's Buying, became a statement. The title track didn't just showcase their musical talent, it also carried a political edge, setting Megadeth apart from other thrash bands. For Ellefson, this was proof that Mustaine's firing had been a blessing. Without it, he might never have found the freedom to explore ideas Metallica never would. The rivalry between the bands grew, but Ellefson didn't see it as negative. To him, it was competition that pushed both groups to greatness. He often explained that Mustaine's personal pain gave Megadeth its character, and that's what made fans connect so deeply. By the late 80s, Megadeth wasn't living in Metallica's shadow anymore. They were standing beside them as equals. The world of heavy metal soon began comparing Metallica and Megadeth constantly. Fans debated which band was heavier, faster, or more talented. For Mustaine, the rivalry was personal. For Ellefson, it was proof that the firing had worked in their favor. Ellefson explained that being fired gave Mustaine a chip on his shoulder. That chip turned into Megadeth's competitive spirit. While Metallica conquered arenas, Megadeth worked tirelessly to stay neck and neck. Albums like Rust in Peace and Countdown to Extinction showed the world they weren't just challengers, they were champions in their own right. Ellefson often pointed out that if Mustaine had stayed in Metallica, he would never have had this independence. He would have been just one piece of Metallica's puzzle, not the mastermind of his own vision. The firing, painful as it was, gave him the freedom to lead. And as fans flocked to see Megadeth live, Ellefson realized they weren't just supporting Mustaine's revenge, they were witnessing history. The rivalry between Metallica and Megadeth became one of the most famous stories in rock. But for Ellefson, it was also a reminder that sometimes rejection is the greatest gift life can hand you. Of course, the journey wasn't easy. Mustaine's anger drove him, but it also brought challenges. Substance abuse, inner conflicts, and lineup changes often threatened to tear Megadeth apart. Ellefson, as the steady presence, watched it all unfold. But he still believed the firing was the key to Megadeth's story. Without that harsh rejection, Mustaine might never have pushed himself through the struggles. Ellefson noted that hardship shaped Mustaine's resilience. Every obstacle, from addiction to industry battles, seemed to fuel his determination to prove his worth. Even when the band faced turmoil, fans stuck around. They knew Megadeth wasn't just another thrash band, it was the product of raw pain and unstoppable willpower. And Ellefson believed this authenticity was what made the band last. For him, the firing wasn't just about music, it was about character. Mustaine became who he was because he had to rebuild himself from nothing, and Ellefson respected that deeply.